The morning sun peeked through the blinds of Shanice Williams' small apartment as her alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. She groaned, reaching over to silence it before the noise woke her two children. 10-year-old Jamal and 7-year-old Kiara were still fast asleep, and she wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. Shanice slipped out of bed and padded quietly to the bathroom. The mirror revealed tired eyes that had seen too many early mornings and late nights. At 28, she felt decades older, her youth stolen by responsibility and struggle. She splashed cold water on her face and whispered her daily mantra, "Just keep going. They're worth it." By 6:15, she had prepared breakfast and lunch boxes for the kids, leaving notes with little hearts for each of them. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, would arrive at 7 o'clock to get the children ready for school. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but it was all Shanice could manage on her waitressing salary. The bus ride to the Greasy Spoon Diner took 30 minutes. Shanice spent it studying for her online business classes. She dreamed of opening her own restaurant someday, but that dream seemed further away with each passing month of barely making rent. The diner sat on the corner of Main and Elm, its neon sign flickering inconsistently, much like the management's commitment to their employees. Shanice had arrived 15 minutes early, as always, and tied her apron around her waist with practiced efficiency. "You're on Section 3 today," barked Derek, the floor manager, without looking up from his clipboard. "And remember, we had complaints about slow service yesterday." Shanice bit her tongue. She knew those complaints came from a table that had ordered complicated special requests during the lunch rush, and she had handled it as quickly as possible. But Derek always found a way to make every issue her fault. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. The morning rush began at 7:30. Shanice moved between tables with grace and speed, balancing plates along her arms and remembering every special request without writing it down. Regular customers specifically asked to sit in her section, appreciating her warm smile and attentive service. "How's Jamal doing in his math class?" asked Mr. Henderson, an elderly teacher who came every Tuesday for the breakfast special. "He's improving," Shanice answered proudly while refilling his coffee. "That tutor you recommended is really making a difference." These small connections made the job bearable. Shanice knew most of her customers by name, remembered their preferences, and kept track of their lives. To her, waitressing wasn't just about serving food. It was about building a community. During a rare quiet moment around 10 a.m., Shanice noticed Derek watching her from the counter, his eyes narrowed. She quickly wiped down an already clean table, knowing he hated to see staff standing around. "Williams," he called out. "Table 7 needs bussing, and there are new customers waiting to be seated. Pick up the pace." Shanice glanced at Table 7. A family was still eating their meal. There was nothing to bus yet. As for new customers, the hostess was already guiding them to a table. Derek's criticism made no sense, but Shanice nodded anyway. "Right away," she said, moving toward the kitchen to check on her orders. Little did she know that this ordinary Tuesday would soon become the most extraordinary day of her life. As the lunch crowd began to filter in, none of them stood out to her. Certainly not the elderly man in the worn jacket who quietly took a seat in the corner of her section, watching the diner with unusually observant eyes. The lunch rush at the Greasy Spoon was in full swing. The diner buzzed with the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, and the sizzle of the grill. Shanice moved efficiently between tables, her notepad in hand and a smile ready for each customer despite her growing fatigue. At 12:45 p.m., the bell above the door jingled. An elderly man stepped inside, pausing at the entrance to catch his breath. He wore a faded brown jacket with patches on the elbows, wrinkled khaki pants that hung loosely on his thin frame, and scuffed shoes that had clearly seen better days. His white hair was neatly combed, but his unshaven face and the slight stoop in his posture gave him a vulnerable appearance. The hostess on duty, Tiffany, glanced up and quickly looked away, pretending to be busy with menus. Shanice noticed this from across the room and frowned slightly. She had seen this behavior before. Staff avoiding customers who looked like they might not leave good tips. "I'll seat him, Tiffany," Shanice called out, already moving toward the front. "He's not in your section," Tiffany muttered, rolling her eyes. "It's fine. I can handle one more table," Shanice replied, grabbing a menu. She approached the elderly man with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Table for one?" The man looked up, his blue eyes surprisingly sharp despite his frail appearance. Yes, please, somewhere quiet if possible. I have the perfect spot, Janice said, leading him to a corner booth in her section. She noticed he walked slowly, his hand occasionally reaching out for support. My name is Janice, and I'll be taking care of you today, she said, helping him into his seat. Can I start you off with something to drink? Just water for now, please, he replied, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. And my name is Earl. Nice to meet you, Earl. I'll be right back with your water and give you a moment with the menu. As Janice walked away, she felt Derek's eyes following her. From behind the counter, he made a show of looking at his watch and then glaring at her, as if she had wasted valuable time by being polite to Earl. When Janice returned with the water, she found Earl squinting at the menu, holding it at arm's length and then bringing it close to his face. Everything all right, sir? She asked. Earl looked up with a sheepish smile. I seem to have forgotten my reading glasses. These old eyes aren't what they used to be. No problem at all. Would you like me to go through some options for you? That would be very kind, Earl replied. Janice noticed April and Marcus, two other servers, watching her and whispering. She heard April say, she's wasting her time. That guy probably can't even afford the senior special. Ignoring them, Janice pulled out her chair and sat across from Earl. She began describing the lunch specials, taking care to mention prices too, sensing that might be a concern for him. The meatloaf is my personal favorite, she confided. My grandmother used to make it the same way, with a little brown sugar in the glaze, and it comes with two sides for just $8.99. Earl smiled, a warmth reaching his eyes. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Meatloaf it is, then. As Janice stood to place his order, she saw Derek making a beeline toward her, his face tight with irritation. Williams. A word now, he demanded, jerking his head toward the kitchen. Once they were out of earshot of customers, Derek hissed. What do you think you're doing? We don't sit with customers, and we don't waste time chatting when there are other tables waiting. He couldn't read the menu. Not my problem, Derek cut her off. And not yours either. Take his order and move on. This isn't a charity, it's a business. Janice returned to Earl's table with her smile firmly back in place, though it took effort. Your meatloaf will be out shortly. Can I get you anything else in the meantime? No, thank you, dear, Earl said. His eyes followed her as she moved to her other tables, noting how she maintained her cheerful demeanor despite the visible tension with her manager. What Janice didn't realize was that Earl's gaze missed nothing, not the way Derek treated her, not the whispers of her coworkers, and certainly not the exceptional service she provided despite it all. Beneath his humble exterior, Earl was taking mental notes, and his observations would soon change everything. When Janice returned to the kitchen, Earl's meatloaf was ready. The cook, Jerome, gave her a sympathetic look. Derek giving you trouble again? He asked quietly, sliding the plate toward her. Nothing I can't handle, Janice replied, checking that everything on the plate looked perfect. She added an extra dinner roll from the warming tray. This gentleman might need a little extra today. Jerome winked. You got a good heart, girl. Too good for this place. Janice carried the steaming plate to Earl's table, setting it down carefully. Here you go, sir. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. And I threw in an extra roll. They're baked fresh this morning. Earl's eyes lit up at the sight of the food. This looks wonderful. Thank you, Janice. As she turned to leave, Janice noticed Earl's hands trembling as he tried to cut into the meatloaf. He managed to saw off a small piece, but it fell off his fork before reaching his mouth, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Janice had glanced around the diner. Derek was busy arguing with a delivery person at the back door. Without hesitation, she slid into the seat across from Earl. Would you mind if I helped you for just a moment? She asked quietly, respecting his dignity. Earl looked up, his eyes revealing a mixture of shame and gratitude. I don't want to be a bother. My arthritis acts up sometimes, makes these simple tasks rather difficult. It's no bother at all, Janice assured him, taking his knife and fork. She cut the meatloaf into bite-sized pieces, working quickly but discreetly. My grandfather had arthritis too. Used to say his fingers felt like they were full of broken glass on bad days. Earl nodded. That's exactly how it feels. You're very understanding, young lady. Life's hard enough without people making it harder, Shanice replied with a smile. She finished cutting the food and slid the plate back toward him. There you go. Enjoy your meal. As she stood up, Shanice felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Derek standing there, his face twisted in anger. My office. Now, he said through clenched teeth. Let me just check on my other tables. Now, Derek repeated, his voice dangerously low. Shanice followed him to the small office at the back of the diner, her heart pounding. Through the narrow window in the office door, she could see Earl watching with concern as he ate his meal. What part of don't sit with customers didn't you understand? Derek demanded, closing the door behind them. He needed help cutting his food, Shanice explained. His hands were shaking badly. That is not your problem, Derek interrupted. Your job is to take orders and deliver food. Period. But. No buts. Derek slammed his hand on the desk. This is the third time today I've had to speak to you about proper procedure. I've been looking for a reason to let you go, and you just gave me one. Shanice felt the blood drain from her face. You're firing me, or helping an elderly man cut his food? I'm firing you for repeatedly violating company policy, Derek corrected, already pulling out the termination paperwork from his desk drawer. You waste time chatting with customers, you give away free food, and now you're sitting at tables during the lunch rush. That's not fair, and you know it, Shanice protested, her voice rising. I have the highest customer satisfaction ratings of anyone here. Ratings don't pay the bills, Derek said coldly. Clear out your locker and return your apron. Your final check will be mailed. Shanice stood frozen, her mind racing to her children, to the rent due next week, to the electricity bill she had just managed to pay yesterday. Please, she said quietly. I need this job. You should have thought of that before you decided to play social worker instead of waitress, Derek replied, turning his attention to the paperwork. You're done here. As Shanice walked back through the diner, fighting back tears, she noticed Earl had finished his meal. He smiled warmly at her, completely unaware that his simple meal had just cost her livelihood. What neither of them knew was that this moment, this simple act of kindness and its unjust punishment, would soon set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. Shanice stood in the employee locker room, her hands shaking as she emptied the small metal compartment that had been hers for the past 3 years. There wasn't much: a spare hairnet, a bottle of pain reliever, a photo of Jamal and Kiara that she had taped to the inside of the door. She removed it carefully, not wanting to tear the already worn edges. I heard what happened, said a voice behind her. It was Loretta, the 60-year-old line cook who had been at the Greasy Spoon longer than anyone else. It ain't right, what Derek did. Shanice nodded, not trusting herself to speak without breaking down. She folded her apron neatly and placed it on the bench. That man you were helping. He asked about you after you disappeared, Loretta continued. I think he knew something was wrong. Derek probably told him I was fired for bothering customers, Shanice said bitterly, sipping up her small bag. Loretta shook her head. Actually, Derek wouldn't tell him anything. Just rushed him the check and tried to get him out the door. But that old man wouldn't budge until he paid. Left you this, too. She held out an envelope. Shanice took it hesitantly. Inside was a $50 bill and a note written in shaky handwriting. Thank you for your kindness, Earl. Tears welled in her eyes. $50 was generous, but it wouldn't make up for losing her job. Still, the gesture touched her. I've got to pick up my kids, Shanice said, tucking the envelope into her purse. Tell everyone I said goodbye. As she walked out the back door of the diner, Shanice mentally calculated her options. She had about $230 in savings. Rent was due in 2 weeks, $750 for their small 2-bedroom apartment. Then there were utilities, food, Jamal's asthma medication. The bus ride home was a blur of anxiety. By the time she reached her stop, Shanice had sent texts to 3 friends who worked at other restaurants, asking about job openings. None had responded yet. Mrs. Patterson looked surprised when Shanice knocked on her door at 2:30 p.m. You're home early, she remarked, inviting Shanice inside. Kiara was napping on the couch while Mrs. Patterson folded laundry. I lost my job today, Shanice admitted, keeping her voice low to not wake her daughter. Mrs. Patterson's face fell. Oh, honey, what happened? I helped an elderly customer who couldn't cut his food. My manager said I was breaking rules by sitting with him. The absurdity of it hit her all over again, and Shanice felt fresh anger rising. That's ridiculous, Mrs. Patterson declared. You should fight it. File for wrongful termination or something. Shanice shook her head. I can't afford a lawyer, and I don't have time for a fight. I need to find a new job fast. After thanking Mrs. Patterson and gently waking Kiera, Shanice headed to her apartment. She spent the afternoon making calls and filling out online applications for every restaurant within bus distance of their home. By 5:00 p.m., she had submitted 12 applications but secured no interviews. When Jamal came home from his after-school program, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Why are you home, Mom? He asked, dropping his backpack by the door. Are you sick? Shanice sat both children down at their small kitchen table. I'm not sick, but I did lose my job today. Kiera's lower lip trembled. Does that mean we have to move again? No, baby, Shanice said firmly, though she wasn't entirely sure. It means Mom needs to find a new job, and things might be tight for a little while. But we've been through tough times before, right? Both children nodded solemnly. Too solemnly for kids their age, Shanice thought with a pang of guilt. For tonight, though, she continued, forcing cheerfulness into her voice, we're going to have spaghetti for dinner, and then we'll play that board game Grandma sent for Christmas. How does that sound? As the children helped set the table, Shanice's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with the area's business district prefix. She answered cautiously. Is this Shanice Williams? Asked a professional-sounding woman. Yes, this is she. My name is Barbara Chen, Executive Assistant at National Restaurant Group. We'd like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Are you available? Shanice frowned in confusion. National Restaurant Group was one of the largest restaurant chains in the country. Why would they be calling her? May I ask what this is regarding? She inquired. There was a slight pause. I'm not at liberty to discuss details over the phone, but it relates to your employment situation. Transportation will be provided. As Shanice hung up, bewilderment replaced her despair. Something strange was happening, but for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope. At exactly 8:30 a.m. the next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Shanice's apartment building. The driver, a woman in a neat uniform, confirmed Shanice's name and opened the door for her. Where exactly are we going? Shanice asked as she settled into the plush leather seat. The National Restaurant Group headquarters downtown, the driver replied. We should arrive just before your 9 a.m. meeting. Shanice smoothed down her best blouse, a simple navy blue button-up she'd ironed twice this morning. She had never been to the business district before, except passing through on the bus. As the car navigated through traffic, tall glass buildings began to appear, their windows reflecting the morning sunlight. They pulled up to the tallest building in the area, with NRG displayed prominently at the top. The driver escorted Shanice to the lobby, where a receptionist greeted her immediately. Ms. Williams, welcome to National Restaurant Group. Please take this visitor badge. Barbara will be down shortly to bring you upstairs. Shanice pinned the badge to her blouse, trying to hide how impressed she was by the marble floors and modern art that decorated the vast lobby. Whatever this meeting was about, it was clearly important. A few minutes later, a woman in a gray suit approached her. Ms. Williams, I'm Barbara Chen. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Barbara led her to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. As they ascended to the top floor, Shanice finally asked the question that had kept her awake most of the night. Ms. Chen, I still don't understand why I'm here. Barbara offered a small smile. All will be explained shortly. I'm just the messenger. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area marked Executive Offices. Barbara guided Shanice through to a large conference room with windows overlooking the entire city. Please wait here. Would you like coffee or water? Barbara asked. Water would be fine, thank you. Shanice replied, her throat suddenly dry. Left alone, Shanice approached the windows, marveling at the view. From this height, she could see the neighborhood where the Greasy Spoon was located. It seemed so small from up here. The door opened, and Shanice turned around. Her jaw dropped as she recognized the man entering the room. It was Earl, the elderly customer from yesterday, but completely transformed. Gone were the shabby clothes and stooped posture. Instead, he wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his white hair neatly combed, his posture straight and commanding. He walked with confidence, no sign of the trembling hands or frailty he had displayed in the diner. "Hello, Shanice," he said, his voice much stronger than she remembered. "Please, have a seat. I believe we have much to discuss." Shanice sat down slowly, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. "You're confused, I imagine," Earl said, taking a seat across from her. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Earl Jenkins. I'm the CEO of National Restaurant Group, which recently acquired the Greasy Spoon chain." Shanice's eyes widened. "You were pretending to be a customer." Earl nodded. "I make it a point to visit our new acquisitions incognito. It's the only way to see how a restaurant truly operates, how managers treat their staff, how staff treats their customers, especially those who seem less profitable." He leaned forward, his eyes serious. "What I witnessed yesterday was deeply troubling. Your manager fired you for showing basic human decency, a very quality we most value in our employees." Shanice was still processing this information when Barbara returned with water. Earl thanked her and continued. "After I left the diner, I requested immediate background checks on both you and your former manager, Derek. What we discovered was concerning. Derek has a history of complaints from female and minority staff members, all of which were mysteriously dismissed. Meanwhile, you have consistently received excellent customer reviews and have a perfect attendance record despite working double shifts." Earl took a sip of water before delivering the news that would change Shanice's life. "I've already authorized Derek's termination, effective immediately. As for you, Shanice, I'd like to offer you a position." "A position?" Shanice repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Yes, but before we discuss that, there's something else you should know." Earl pressed a button on the conference table, and a screen descended from the ceiling. "I think you should see exactly what type of person you were working for." The screen flickered to life, displaying security camera footage from the Greasy Spoon. Janice recognized the date in the corner. It was from yesterday. The angle showed the entire dining area, including Earl's table and Derek's movements throughout the restaurant. "We installed these cameras 2 weeks ago as part of our standard acquisition procedure," Earl explained. "The previous owner agreed to it as part of the sale terms, but managers weren't informed." Shanice watched as the footage showed her helping Earl with his meal. The camera captured Derek's angry reaction, the confrontation, and then switched to footage from inside the office. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. Derek's aggressive posture, pointing finger, and Shanice's defeated stance told the story. But then the footage shifted to earlier incidents Shanice hadn't witnessed. Derek shortchanging a young black busboy. Derek placing his hand inappropriately on a waitress's back. Derek throwing away job applications after looking at the names and addresses. "We've compiled 2 months' worth of evidence," Earl said, turning off the screen. "Derek's behavior violates not only company policy but likely several employment laws. Our legal team is reviewing everything." Shanice sat in stunned silence. She had suspected Derek treated others unfairly, but the extent of it was shocking. "I had no idea," she finally said. "Most people don't," Earl replied. "That's why I do these visits personally. Numbers and reports only tell part of the story. I need to see the human element." He paused, studying her face. "You know what impressed me most about you, Shanice?" She shook her head. "You helped me without expectation of reward. You saw someone struggling and acted with compassion, even when it put your job at risk. That's rare in any industry." Barbara entered the room again, this time carrying a folder which she placed in front of Earl. He opened it and slid several documents toward Shanice. "This is my offer," he said. "We're restructuring the Greasy Spoon as part of our urban renewal initiative. I want you to be the new manager." Shanice's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. The salary listed was more than double what she had been making. "But I don't have management experience," she protested weakly. Earl smiled. "You'd have something more valuable: integrity and natural leadership. The technical aspects can be taught. We'll provide full training at our corporate facility." "There's more," Barbara added, pointing to another document. "This outlines our education assistance program. You mentioned to Earl that your grandmother taught you to cook. We could sponsor your culinary education if that's a path you'd like to pursue. Janice felt tears threatening. She had shared that small detail with Earl during their brief interaction, never imagining it would be remembered, let alone acted upon. Why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because businesses aren't just about profits, Earl answered firmly. They're about people. When I started this company 40 years ago, I was a short order cook with a dream. Too many executives forget where they came from once they reach the top floor. I make it my mission not to. He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing for Shanice to join him. From this height, they could see several of the company's restaurants scattered across the city. Each of those locations has a team of people with their own struggles, dreams, and families to support, Earl said. I can't be in all of them, but I can put people like you in charge, people who understand that kindness and business success aren't mutually exclusive. Janice had looked out at the city, seeing it differently now, not just as a place where she struggled to survive, but as a landscape of possibilities. There's something else you should know, Earl said, his tone more serious. The investigation isn't just about Durek. We've found evidence suggesting similar issues at other locations. If you accept this position, you'll be part of a larger initiative to transform our company culture. Barbara handed Shanice another folder. This contains the full details of the offer, including health benefits, childcare assistance, and relocation options if you wish to move closer to the restaurant. Take it home, review it, and let us know your decision by Friday. As Shanice accepted the folder, she realized that her simple act of kindness hadn't just saved her job. It had opened the door to the future she had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. Shanice sat at her kitchen table late that night after putting the children to bed. The folder from National Restaurant Group lay open before her, its contents spread out across the worn wooden surface. She had read through every document 3 times, still struggling to believe this was real. The offer was more generous than anything she could have imagined. Beyond the substantial salary increase, there was comprehensive health insurance that would cover Jamal's asthma medication completely. The child care assistance program would help with after-school care. The education benefits would allow her to finally complete the business degree she had started years ago before life's responsibilities forced her to drop out. Her phone buzzed with a text from Loretta. You ok, honey? Heard Durek got fired today. Nobody's saying why. Shanice smiled slightly. She hadn't told anyone about the meeting yet, not even her mother. It felt too fragile, too much like a dream that might vanish if spoken aloud. I'm ok, she texted back. Lots to tell you. We'll call tomorrow. She returned to the documents, focusing on one particular page outlining her potential responsibilities as manager. The company wanted to rebrand the Greasy Spoon, modernizing its menu while maintaining its charm as a neighborhood diner. Janice would oversee the transition, with authority to hire her own team. Her mind raced with possibilities. Jerome, the cook who had always been kind to her, deserved a promotion to head chef. Loretta's decades of experience would be invaluable in training new staff. And there were others. Hard-working people who had been overlooked or mistreated under Durek's management. A soft knock on the doorframe interrupted her thoughts. Jamal stood there in his pajamas, looking sleepy but concerned. Mom, are you still looking for a job? He asked. Shanice beckoned him over, pulling him onto her lap despite his protests that he was too big for such treatment at 10 years old. Actually, she said, I might have found something better than my old job. Jamal's eyes widened. Really? What is it? I might become the manager of the diner, Shanice explained, simplifying the situation for him. I would be in charge, making decisions and helping it become a better place. Like a boss? Jamal asked, impressed. Like a boss, Shanice confirmed with a smile. But I thought you said the man there was mean. Did he change his mind? Shanice shook her head. He won't be working there anymore. The company that owns the diner wants me instead. Jamal considered this, his young face serious. Because you're nice to people? The innocent question brought tears to Shanice's eyes. Yes, baby, partly because I'm nice to people. After tucking Jamal back into bed, Shanice returned to the kitchen and made her decision. She picked up her phone and composed an email to the address Barbara had provided, accepting the position and expressing her gratitude for the opportunity. The next morning, she received a call from Earl himself. I'm delighted you've accepted, he said warmly. Barbara will handle the paperwork, but I wanted to personally welcome you to the executive team. Executive team? Shanice repeated, confused. Yes, Earl continued. Your position includes a seat on our Regional Management Council. We're serious about changing our company culture, Shanice. That means elevating voices like yours to decision-making positions. By the end of the week, Shanice had completed her orientation at headquarters. Walking into the Greasy Spoon for the first time as its manager felt surreal. Staff members who had witnessed her humiliating dismissal just days earlier now looked at her with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and in some cases, apprehension. Shanice called everyone together for a meeting before the morning shift began. Standing before her former colleagues, she felt a momentary flutter of nervousness, then remembered Earl's words. Lead with integrity, and people will follow. Many of you are wondering what's happening, she began. As you may have heard, the Greasy Spoon is now part of National Restaurant Group. I've been appointed as the new manager, and we're going to be making some changes. She paused, looking at each person in turn. The biggest change starts today. From now on, this will be a workplace where kindness and respect are valued, where good work is rewarded, where everyone, staff and customers alike, is treated with dignity. As she spoke, Shanice saw hope beginning to dawn on faces that had grown accustomed to fear and frustration. It was the first step in a transformation that would extend far beyond one small diner. 6 months later, the newly renamed Shanice's Place celebrated its grand reopening. The small diner had undergone a complete transformation. The once faded exterior now gleamed with fresh paint in warm, welcoming colors. Large windows allowed natural light to flood the dining area, which had been redesigned with comfortable booths and modern touches while maintaining the cozy atmosphere that regular customers loved. A red ribbon stretched across the entrance, and a small crowd had gathered for the ceremony. Local news cameras captured the moment as Shanice, dressed in a tailored burgundy suit with her hair elegantly styled, stood beside Earl Jenkins at the front door. She nodded to her children, Jamal and Kiara, who held giant scissors between them. Together, they cut the ribbon as the crowd applauded. Shanice's mother wiped tears from her eyes, watching proudly as her daughter's dream became reality. Inside, the restaurant quickly filled with guests eager to try the new menu. Shanice had worked with a culinary consultant to update the offerings, incorporating her grandmother's recipes alongside diner classics. The kitchen, now led by Jerome as head chef, operated smoothly under his experienced guidance. Earl made his way through the crowd, stopping to shake hands and chat with guests. He eventually found Shanice near the counter, where she was checking on a family with a young child who had spilled his drink. "You've done remarkable work here," Earl said after the family had been taken care of. "Sales are up 40% from last quarter's projections." Shanice smiled. "It's not just about the numbers, though, is it?" Earl chuckled. "You sound like me now. But you're right, of course." They looked around the bustling restaurant. Loretta was training 2 new servers, her patient teaching style bringing confidence to their movements. At the register, Mrs. Patterson, whom Shanice had hired as hostess, greeted customers with genuine warmth. "Have you made a decision about the expansion proposal?" Earl asked. Shanice nodded. "I'm ready to present it at next month's executive meeting. 3 more locations in underserved neighborhoods, each with the same hiring practices and community focus we've established here. And the management training program." "The first class starts next week," Shanice replied. 15 employees from across the company, all nominated by their peers for demonstrating exceptional service and leadership potential. A commotion at the door drew their attention. A familiar face entered, Derek, Shanice's former manager. He looked around, clearly surprised by the changes, then froze when he spotted Shanice standing with Earl. For a moment, Shanice felt a flash of the old anxiety, the remembered pain of his cruelty, but it passed quickly, replaced by something unexpected, pity. She approached him calmly. "Hello, Derek. Welcome to Shanice's Place." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I just wanted to see what they did with the old diner. Heard it was under new management." "It is," Shanice confirmed. "Would you like a table? Our lunch special today is meatloaf, my grandmother's recipe." The irony wasn't lost on Derek, whose face flushed with embarrassment. "No, I should go." "Before you do," Shanice said, Keeping her voice gentle but firm, I want you to know something. The management training program I'm launching next month is open to everyone, including those who've made mistakes in the past. If you're ever interested in learning a different approach to leadership, the door is open. After Derek left, Earl placed a hand on Shanice's shoulder. That was generous of you. It's the example I want to set, she replied, breaking cycles rather than perpetuating them. As the afternoon continued, Shanice moved through a restaurant, stopping to check on customers and staff alike. At one table sat a young woman in a waitress uniform from another restaurant, nervously reviewing a job application. Shanice sat down across from her. First time applying for a new position? The woman nodded. I've been at the same place for 2 years, but the manager there. She trailed off. Takes advantage? Doesn't appreciate your work? Shanice suggested gently. Exactly, the woman said, surprised. How did you know? Shanice smiled. Let's just say I've been where you are. Tell me about yourself. What makes you passionate about serving others? As she listened to the young woman's story, Shanice caught Earl watching from across the room, a look of approval and pride on his face. In that moment, she understood that her journey had come full circle. What had begun with a simple act of kindness toward an elderly customer had grown into something much larger, a ripple effect of positive change that would continue to spread far beyond the walls of one small diner.